How are you all doing? I hope you're doing well. I'm excited to bring this amazing dais of people to you today. My name is Thomas Winkley. I'm a technical marketing advocate here on the education team, and we're joined by some amazing creators today to talk about top assets you can use for your workflow. Before we dive into what those assets are, we should do some quick introductions of our guests. So first things first, Jason, you want to say hello to the people and let them know who you are?
Sure. My name's Jason Weimann. I'm a game dev. I've been doing game development for like 20 years, and lately, for the last 10 or so, focused heavily on Unity. I got a YouTube channel where I teach people how to make games in Unity, and a podcast where we talk about random game dev stuff. And I've been using it for a long time. Got a lot of advice and a lot of things that I would recommend to new Unity developers that I want to talk about today.
Perfect. Great to have you, man. So excited to actually be able to hang out with some of these amazing folk. I guess we'll go with Johnny from TurboMakesGames. If you want to introduce yourself and let them know who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Johnny from the TurboMakesGames YouTube channel. Over on my channel, I do a lot of stuff related to Unity's data-oriented technology stack and their entity component system. So a lot of good, fun, high-performance stuff. More recently, I started actually doing a weekly live show called the Hot Path Show, where myself and a couple other co-hosts, we talk about all kinds of data-oriented design topics through game development. So anyways, yeah, excited to be here to talk about some of my favorite assets that work well with both dots as well as non-dots projects. So yeah.
Awesome. And of course, last but certainly not least, Sasquatch Studios. Why don't you say hello to everybody?
Yeah, sure. Hey guys, I'm Brandon from Sasquatch P Studios. I run a YouTube channel called Sasquatch P Studios with my wife. She is the editor and artist. We make tutorials, devlogs, and indie dev life discussion videos, and I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you here as well. I think this is a super cool panel of people. All of your channels are amazing. Your videos are awesome. Definitely have given me a ton of help as an advocate here at Unity. So thank you, because I wouldn't be able to do my job without your tutorials. So I really appreciate it. In this instance, a lot of times the call is not coming from inside the house. So it's actually coming from you all, which I really appreciate. So with that, I guess we should jump into our top, workflow based assets, or assets that just make creating games easier, better. And yeah, let's start with you, Jason, the assets you picked and kind of why, and then we can jump into the actual video you created to talk about them.
All right, so there were three that I picked out that I think make a huge difference for everybody, and at kind of different points and varying stages along the way. These are actually tools that I recommended to a friend earlier this week. I was asking, they're looking at switching to Unity, and these are things that would solve all of the problems that they're actually having. The first one is Proxima Inspector. If you haven't seen this thing, it allows you to essentially have an inspector as if you're on a device, which is amazing and super powerful if you're doing anything on an iPad or an Android device, especially. And then the second one, HotReload, it's amazing, and I don't know how to convince people to use it, but everybody who actually tries it and spends some time with it seems to get converted. It's very hard to convince people that you should be able to just write code and have it automatically instantly work, which is what happens with HotReload. You write the code and code changes happen just right away, instantly. There's no waiting, there's no domain reload, no state blowing up or anything. It just changes. You don't have to add in variables for stuff, but you can. And then the last one was vTabs. And I think there are actually a couple we're going to talk about by the same developer that made vTabs, because those ones are extremely handy and helpful.
Got it. And yeah, I can't wait for everyone to see this video. So without further ado, let's jump in and actually show the demo you created of these amazing assets.
Hey everybody, a couple days ago, a good friend of mine called me up and let me know that he's starting up a new game studio and they're going to be using Unity, but they had a couple questions and wanted to be able to make the process as smooth as possible, and I had some advice for him. So today I want to share with you the advice that I gave to their team and see if it's helpful for you as well, so that way you don't have to have played EverQuest with me back in the 90s to know all of the things that I'm using. For this team, they really had one primary concern, which is around iteration time. Now, with Unity, they already knew that they could build for all of the different platforms and everything was going to work performance-wise, but they were really concerned about how fast it was going to be to actually make changes and do development. If you come from a web background, you know that you just start typing and things appear in the web page right on the other tab instantly, and usually the changes are very fast. Obviously, there's some areas where that's a little bit slower, but for the most part, you get really fast instant feedback. And you also get that in Unity when you're working in the editor. But there are a couple things where it's still just kind of slow, like when you're not working directly in the editor and you want to test something on devices, or when you want to make really fast code changes, or sometimes when I'm just looking things up and trying to find data, it can be very slow and tedious and painful. So in this video, I wanted to cover 3 of the things that I recommended to these guys that I think are extremely helpful and explain why I think they're really helpful. The first one is a tool that I use probably once a week. It's Proxima Runtime Inspector. It's free on the asset store. You can go grab it and pop it right into your project. It takes about a minute, and it gives you the ability to essentially have an inspector on any device. This works on VR devices. It works on mobile devices. It'll work on, I don't know if it works on console devices, but it probably does. And it works on everything that I've ever tried it on before. PC, web. Web is one of the slightly newer ones. But what it does is essentially give you a full-on inspector while your game is running. So you start up the game, you hit a little button, or you automatically start up the inspector. Usually what I do is hide it behind a little cheat key so I know how to do it, and it's only in my development builds. I can turn it on and then connect with the web page or the web browser and then view everything that's going on inside of my project. Now, if you're wondering why this is helpful, you probably run into scenarios where something is working perfectly fine in the editor, but then you put it on device and it's broken and you're getting a bug back, especially if you've got a QA department in a long cycle. You might be sending it off and then they're testing it out on a device that you didn't even try it on, and it's coming back with a bug, and you've got to figure out what's going on here. So Proxima helps when you're debugging that stuff and trying to figure out what the state of these different objects are. Typically, what I found is that there's some little bit of code that's slightly different on my Android device or my iOS device. Sometimes it's in an if-def. Sometimes it's an asset bundle that's just different between devices, and I didn't realize it. Or a lot of times it's just a missing reference or something else, and I can debug and find this stuff. But it's not just useful for that, because it's also helpful for being able to do some testing and modifying of these values at runtime. Now, the free version doesn't allow you to do that. It just allows you to view and, get details and data on stuff. But the upgraded paid version allows you to actually change the data and modify stuff at runtime. So you can go in and modify the way that your characters look. Now you can even modify the materials. You can change out any of the other data, modify your scenes, go unload, disable, enable things, rescale stuff. I found it to be extremely useful, but more so the free version just for debugging and finding things. Even if you don't need, I would say, get the free version, try it out, pop it in there, and then see how often you use it. And then when you get to the point where you need to go edit and modify something, if you've been using it regularly, upgrade to the paid version and support them. They do an awesome job with this tool, and it's extremely helpful if you're working on mobile stuff especially, but helpful for other devices as well. I just wish that this thing had existed way back in the day when I was making my first mobile games. Now I get to use it all the time, and it's super helpful. Like I said, probably about once a week to debug things. And again, can't recommend it any stronger. I'd say it's very worthwhile, and at the price, there's absolutely no reason not to try it out. Now, debugging remote stuff is extremely helpful once a week or so when I run into problems, but this tool is even more helpful, and this is the one that I think really pushed them over the edge. This is HotReload that we're going to talk about, and here you can see I've got a bug where the screen is showing some text, and it's way too long for this text box here. This is the battler that we run every weekend for the Game Dev Show giveaway, but I've got HotReload running here, and I want to fix this issue, and I want to fix it without killing my giveaway and having to restart the whole thing. And you can see that it's got some text, and it's maybe just a little bit too long. If I jump over to my code, you can see that it's got the words battler.playername joined the fight. And if I want, I can just go delete that joined the fight, save, and then I'm just gonna, grab my window here and you can see that it's updated automatically. Let me just do that with it kind of side by side though, just to show a little bit more of the power here. Let's say I didn't want to show the player name and I was like, oh no, this should be actually showing the profession. So now I switch it and look at that, it's showing the profession. Of course, the scenarios that you run into are going to be different for your game, and it's going to be something different every single time. But being able to just very quickly go in and change values of stuff and then see them instantly replicated or showing up in your game is really, really, really powerful. And we don't just have to change values. Of course, we could go in and just like completely disable this. We could go in and add new entries so that it does different stuff. Now it's just sticking on that same name because I commented it out. And we can go modify and debug things. Now, usually the primary thing that I'm using this for is figuring out somebody else's code, what it's supposed to do, and trying out things that I'm pretty sure is the right way, but I'm probably off by like one line of code. I can go through, make the change, see it instantly, and make the correct change and see it instantly. It also helps a lot with catching things like inverted if statements or conditions where I'm checking the wrong thing. You know, I accidentally have if it's not equal to 0 here and my game just stops working, like, oh no, what was the problem? I can just go in right here and change this back over and then have it start working again. So extremely useful. It makes it feel like web development. There are, of course, obviously always going to be some things that you can't do, but I don't really run into those for the most part. I just find that when I want to make changes to my code, I just go in and change it. It instantly shows up and it's pretty amazing. I highly recommend trying this thing out. They have a free trial and then there's an asset store version that is on sale now. I don't know if it's on sale right now, but it was on sale when I recorded this, and I couldn't recommend it higher if you just want to save time and stop hitting play and starting and playing and starting and playing and starting. Just go in and change stuff at runtime and watch how awesome it is. The last tool that I recommended here is vTabs, and vTabs is an extremely light and powerful tool that probably, again, should just be built into the editor. It makes it so that working with folders and different files is extremely easy and has a couple other nice little benefits, like being able to view anything as an inspector tab by just dragging it. So I take this cactus and I drag it up here. It will become its own tab, and now it's locked to that. Just like if I had opened up a new inspector, right-clicked, hit the lock button, which is way off over here off to the side, hit lock, and then made a new tab. So instead of doing that, I can drag that over. But the thing that I use it for more than that is actually doing folder management. So it's vTabs. It works as a folder setup. So I take a folder that I want to work with. I'm working with this cactus folder right now, and I've got these pets in here, and I need to sign or set up these pet visuals. So I go here and I select these, and I take this folder and I drag it over as well, and then I'll make it another tab. Take these tabs, make them side by side, and now I've got a tab or a folder for each of the things that I need to associate. This is even more useful when I end up with a giant folder full of art assets like icons or textures. For instance, this buff icons one is a folder I was using recently. It's got all of them right there, and I don't have to go grab another folder, lock it, and all of that. So again, huge time saver. Not something that totally changes everything, but it changes my workflow enough to make it so that I can get through things extremely quickly. And it's one of the cheapest things out there on the asset store as well. So I couldn't recommend it more. Well, yeah, I don't think so. It's probably, out of all the things that's not free, it's the cheapest great asset that I couldn't recommend people. I don't even know how to say it. To try it out. Try out vTabs. Try out the other two. The other two are extremely useful. vTabs is like super obvious. You pop it in and you just know exactly how to use it. With the Proxima, again, if you've got a game that is running on anything but the editor, anything, even on PC, it'll work. But as soon as you get out to those other devices and you see anything that's just not working the same, but it's working fine in the editor, just install Proxima, try out the free version, check it out and see what's happening, instead of going and adding a bunch of console logs and then trying to debug and figure out what's going on there. Just actually go look at the data like you were in the inspector. And then again, with the HotReload, you just save a ton of time by not having to jump back in and restart your game, restart the context, and lose that. With my multiplayer, losing my voice. With my multiplayer battler, it's really cool because then I don't actually have to restart the battle, and all of the people can keep their state and keep all the people that are entered going as well. But it's more useful for just the day-to-day coding of stuff that has those longer iteration times where you're jumping in and it takes a while to get back to the state that you want to reproduce. If you can just make the code change and instantly see it, it save a ton of time. And well, I already talked about vTabs just now, so I'm not going to recap it.
Wow, that was incredible. I'm actually kind of blown away how efficient HotReload, like how effectively and efficient it worked in your demo. I kind of need it actually. After watching that.
Yeah, it's really helpful. I'm actually doing a couple more videos on it. I've done some dedicated videos just on that tool. And when I said that earlier, I was talking to a friend earlier this week who was trying to get into Unity. They were considering what things to go with. And currently they build stuff in a JavaScript web setup. So they're building games, but they're doing it all kind of by hand with some more JavaScripty stuff. They make changes and the changes appear instantly, just like most web developers are used to. They're used to that system where you just change something, you have the browser here, you don't even have to click over there. It's just automatically instantly there. And HotReload is pretty much that. Like you type the code in and you have your editor window here and you just see it go, oh, hey, change detected, reloading, and suddenly your enemies are shooting, or your players shooting a spread shot, or your reload timer is actually working, or whatever new feature or functionality you put in is just there. So it's extremely helpful for me, especially having anything that's got any kind of state that has to get set up. You get a game where you've got to click through, go through menus and kind of get into a state, and you want to debug and try to figure stuff out. Or when I'm working with other people's code. So I'll put in breakpoints, kind of figure out what's going on there, change it, and then watch it happen without having to reload it. It's a huge time saver, and out of everything that you can do to save time other than a solid state drive, it's probably like the next best thing that you can put in there to speed up your Unity experience, I think.
Got it. And Johnny, Sasquatch, have you worked with any of those tools that Jason brought up before, or were these net new to you in watching those videos?
Yeah, of course I've heard Jason talk about HotReload a bunch. I know he's a very big fan of it. I haven't really put it through its paces too much myself. A lot of the stuff that I work with is kind of, ECS based and burst. So I don't know how well it works with all that, but I think I read somewhere that it does. So, and if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure HotReload also has like a trial version that you can use. So I might just kind of end up picking up that trial version and playing around with it with some of my ECS projects and see how well it does.
Yeah, and it's relatively cheap on the asset store too.
Yeah, I have not heard of Proxima before. I can see how that would be particularly really, really helpful, especially for like mobile and whatnot. Yeah. You mentioned even for PC for specific use cases, I can see that as well, but I had not heard of it. I was kind of blown away that they give so much away for free on that one. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and HotReload, I recently acquired that like maybe less than a month ago, so I don't have too much experience with it, but especially, when it comes to writing logic, even like simple things or trying to figure out if I'm doing something with any math in my code, I come from the math school of trial and error. Yep. So it's like HotReload can really save you a whole lot of time, especially it's like, oh, I just need to that needs to be negative instead of positive or whatever, right? Instead of having to exit and change it and then play again, you save yourself like a minute and 30 seconds every single time you do that. It's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jason, that's a great point that you bring up about how like if you have to get to some certain state in your game, like you have to go through some specific set of steps to test out some behavior that you're trying to change around. That can be definitely quite annoying. Having to do that over and over and over again. So if you can just get to that state and then just continue making the changes in your code and being able to see the results right there, like that's totally worth it.
Yeah. vTabs too, you sold me on that instantly, honestly. Like I already have one of the assets by that developer and it looked great. I love those assets that are just plug and play and instantly just make Unity better. That looked fantastic.
Perfect. Well, I think next we should definitely, Johnny, have you talk about the assets you selected and why. It would be really cool to hear which ones you jumped onto, and then we can obviously show the demo.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of the framing that I took when I was choosing my 3 assets for this video is I wanted to pick some assets that are really good for kind of like prototyping and like the earlier stages of development, but also really help you as you kind of like grow your project out as it becomes like, bigger and you start have to, manage more and more things. So anyways, the 3 assets that I chose are, the first one is called ALINE, which is really just a much better version of being able to draw debug lines and gizmos and shapes and things like this inside the Unity editor. It's really cool because it also works in runtime, but I find it most beneficial to actually use these debug gizmos inside the editor. You just get a whole lot more options. And in the video, I'm going to be showing you kind of some examples about, how I practically use these in some projects. The next one that I picked was the Doozy UI Manager. And this one's really great for, again, as your project grows larger and larger and you want to start having more, complex UI setups, you want to have some, kind of more in-depth menuing or add a little bit of animations to have some nice, flair and everything like that. So Doozy UI Manager gives you a lot of that stuff right out of the box. And it's all built off of, Unity's regular UI setup. So if you're familiar with that, then it's going to be pretty easy for you to work with. And then the final one that I chose is just kind of like a broad category of assets. I wanted to give a big shout out to the Synty Studios low poly assets. Specifically, I'm going to be showing the Sci-Fi Worlds pack, but I really think that all their packs are great. They just come with a ton of good, different vehicles and props and characters and just so much for, if you're building out a game in that type of style, you have like pretty much everything that you need. Of course, you can, get some custom assets of your own after that. But even if you don't want to do the low poly style, I think it's also just really good for kind of, blocking things out, like being able to have some kind of like test kind of placeholder assets. Yep. Where you're still kind of like figuring out what your art style is and all that. So yeah, those are my 3 assets.
Perfect. We'll jump over to the demo, let him show you and let him show you what it's all about, and then we'll jump back and talk about them.
So the first asset I'm going to be talking about is called ALINE. Now, ALINE is a replacement for Unity's debug visualization and gizmos, which you get right out of the box. So normally in Unity, you can just do like a debug.drawLine or use gizmos to do other types of visualizations of things in the editor as you're developing along in your game. Now, ALINE is awesome because it is basically a much better replacement for the built-in debug gizmos and drawing features. So with ALINE, not only can you draw the simple stuff that Unity has out of the box, like lines and spheres and so on, but you can also do more complex things, like you can have grids and arrows and different types of 3D primitives. So this is extremely useful because you don't have to like go and create your own custom functions for drawing like a grid. It's something out of the box that you can do right away with just a few lines of code. But not only that, you can actually configure the look and feel a little bit better than with regular Unity. So with regular Unity, of course, you can basically just set the color of the debug drawing lines. However, with ALINE, you can actually set the thickness as well as some other properties of the lines of these different primitives for better visualizations. So let me talk a little bit about how I actually use this in a project. So for me, visually debugging is something that is extremely beneficial, especially when I'm dealing with things that are maybe a little bit more abstract as I'm kind of going through the process of development. For me, I have a very iterative development process. So I'll do things just kind of, like one step at a time and make sure that I have everything correct as I'm going along. If I'm not all the way at that end product yet, I'm not necessarily always going to be able to have a good visual representation of the entities in my game interacting in the way that they should be, because it's not been completed yet. So with that kind of iterated development approach I take, I find it very helpful to start adding some debug visualizations as kind of these intermediary steps, so I can visualize them, I can see them in the world, and then make sure that what I want to happen is actually happening in the project. So to give you a more concrete example of this, I recently was working on a little bit of a racing project where I created a flow field in order to control the vehicle's AI. So if you're not familiar with the concept of a flow field, basically you take your whole game world and you break it up into a grid of cells. And then what I've decided to do is basically assign a direction on every arrow for where the AI vehicles should be moving at any given point. So it doesn't matter where the vehicle is on the lap, they always know where to go next in order to follow the path to complete the lap. So as you can imagine, this takes several steps to get towards this end goal. So I found it very beneficial for me to use ALINE's debug visualization to draw the grid as well as arrows on the cells. And then as I implemented each step of this algorithm, I was able to go back to Unity and confirm that the arrows were all kind of pointing in the correct direction for that, particular step that I was implementing. So I know ALINE probably sounds very appealing to you right now, but I haven't even mentioned my favorite feature, and that is the fact that ALINE is fully compatible with Unity's burst as well as job system. So if you're running some, very highly optimized code inside of a burst context and you're running it multi-threaded through a job system, a lot of functions don't normally work through Unity's burst compiler as well as the job system. However, ALINE works perfectly and it is extremely fast and efficient. And I've found that it doesn't really add a whole lot of overhead, even when you're visualizing a very large number of things throughout the development of your game. Okay, now the second asset that I'm going to be talking about is Doozy UI Manager. Now, Doozy UI Manager is really great because it's an extension of Unity's built-in UI system. I think out of the box, Unity's UI system is pretty good. It gives you a lot of good features. However, it ends up being a little bit limited when you start to get to more complex user interfaces, which you find in a lot of games. If you want to have kind of a complex menuing system where maybe you have, multiple layers of menus, like say you have like a settings menu, you kind of have like that top level settings menu, and then you can click into different subcategories, which bring you to different pages of menus that have all different types of, sliders and scroll bars and other configurable options. All this stuff is definitely doable with Unity's built-in UI solution. However, actually making a good solution to manage all that isn't something that Unity has out of the box. So you're kind of left on your own to create something like that. Now, where Doozy UI comes in is this gives you a lot of those management features kind of out of the box. So for example, with the more kind of complex menuing structure that I kind of just mentioned, it has this visual configuration system called the flow graph, where you can essentially connect different nodes of these different submenus that you might have. And then using all of its built-in features, it's able to easily show the appropriate menus for any given situation. And you can also do other cool things like having tabbed menus. So you can have kind of, multiple tabs, and when you click on a tab, it'll show that specific menu. But it does go further than that. It also gives you animations on, the transitions between these scenes, as well as some UI elements. So maybe you have like a checkbox. So if you actually click on that checkbox, rather than it just statically turning on or off, you can actually kind of animate that check mark a little bit to give the user kind of a little bit more feedback and make it a little bit more obvious that they just interacted with that particular feature. And there's also kind of like little things where you have like radio buttons. So, for example, in Unity out of the box, we have just regular checkboxes. However, we can actually have like a group of radio buttons where you can kind of enforce to have one and only one of those buttons selected at a time. And I'm really just scratching the surface about what Doozy UI can do. And it does actually build off of a lot of Unity's regular UI components. So if you are already familiar with those, you will be able to kind of extend and add your own features fairly easily. So the third and final asset pack that I'm going to be talking about is actually really more of a kind of broad group of assets, but I am going to be showing you one specifically and how I've used it in a project. But anyways, I'd like to talk about the Polygon low poly asset packs by Synty Studios. Now, these are really great asset packs because they have a really cool low poly look, but they also give you a ton of things in them. So each pack is typically going to come with a bunch of characters, vehicles, environments, buildings, props. And not only does it give you all this stuff, but it gives you actually a bunch of different variations on all these things. So you can kind of, swap out the materials to have a little bit different looks. So you can have a whole lot of variation in your projects. And one of the things that I really like about Synty Studios is they don't just focus on like one specific genre or, type of asset pack, but they have just like a ton, and they fit all different types of games. So, there's like Western, sci-fi, fantasy, a little bit more realistic, low poly realistic. Now, I know the low poly style isn't necessarily for everyone. I particularly do kind of find the low poly style pretty cool. However, I do think that, even if you're not using a low poly style in your game, It is really good to use just for kind of blocking things out and figuring out how things should kind of be laid out in your world. Once again, because these asset packs come with so many different, vehicles, props, buildings, and so on. If you have a couple of these packs, you really end up with a very large bank of assets that you can use to pull with to kind of set up a test little scene in your game to just kind of figure out how things will look. And so it can be really good kind of when you're going through the prototyping stage, like maybe you want to get a little bit past just kind of like a raw gray block style, but you can actually have some placeholder assets in there, until you get to the point where you can actually, create the assets that are a little bit more custom for your specific game. But anyways, I do just want to give you a little showcase of a project that I created using the Sci-Fi Worlds pack, again by Synty Studios. And with this one, I created kind of like a simple real-time strategy type game where you have the ability to build different buildings and spawn different units that go and attack each other. And pretty much all the visual assets that you see in this project all came from this specific asset pack. So for example, all the buildings, all the platforms that the buildings are being built on, all the kind of, extra props and features and cool looking things off to the side, those were all from this one asset pack. Even the ground material and some of the kind of rocks and different ground effects, those all came from this particular asset pack. And so I think this style fits this particular game quite well. But even if you did want to make something a little bit more realistic, at least doing this would be like a really great first step of kind of just like figuring out how things were going to look in general, and give you a good idea about what types of things that you might need as you start to continue development in your game. So anyways, those are 3 of my favorite assets that I end up using in a lot of different projects. Once again, they were ALINE for debug visualization, Doozy UI Manager for awesome UI management, and the Polygon asset packs by Synty Studios for prototyping, as well as using them as final assets for game projects.
Yeah, those were super sick. I was actually really excited that you called out the Synty asset specifically, because on the education side of the house, that's something that we deal with a ton, right? We actually provide some of those to students. And so I've become really comfortable and familiar with Synty, and it's awesome to see them used not just at the level I'm used to, but also at the level of, actual production, like the work you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think the Synty Studios assets are great. They have, a whole bunch of different packs at, varying price ranges. So I think there's even some free ones that you can get, and some also like very cheap asset packs, just get you started, get you familiar with their workflows. And as far as even like the characters go, like they work really well with, animations from things, just kind of like default character animations and all that. So I think they're really good asset packs overall, and just, again, a great way to kind of like get started on a new project, I feel.
Yeah, Johnny, you made a really good point about the fact that they're production ready, but they're also perfect, even if that's not the art style that you're going for. They're really nice to block things out, because you can get really tired of like gray boxing everything and just looking at that really awful look. So having something that's actually in there that looks good, even if it's not going to be in your final product, that's a great idea.
Yeah, it's like kind of like a step up from gray boxing, where you can kind of like, build out a room and you have like an actual table with things on it, and, have a window here, and you can, kind of start to get a feel of kind of the sizing of things and all that. So, yeah.
I got to say, Doozy UI Manager, I got really excited when I saw that one. I've made a mental note to go and put that in my cart, because I don't want to forget about it. Making UI is like the bane of my existence. It's just like, it's it's a lot of work to get UI that looks good and responds well. And like you said, like putting animations in there, it can get complex very, very quickly. So I didn't actually know that an asset existed like this that could actually manage a lot of that stuff for you. So I got really excited by that. So I'm happy you threw that in there, because I didn't know. So thank you.
No, Doozy UI is great. And, especially with all like the kind of like visual flow graphs that it has, like when you kind of want to have like a, hierarchical menu where you're, maybe have like a settings menu where you, click on one, kind of top level option, and that brings you to like a new page. And maybe there's, even further pages down, you can go from there. Like you can all manage that through kind of this flow graph setup. And if you ever want to go back and change things later on, you can just kind of rewire things as you need to. And it's really nice.
Yeah, I've used that one a few times, and it's awesome, but I also hate making UI. So now I just kind of make somebody else do that part and let them use Doozy or whatever they want to use. And the Synty assets, same. Like I've been using those forever. But the one that really excited me was this line drawing tool, because that I can see myself using in just about any kind of game. Anything where I've got stuff that moves around or things that collide or anything with data in it at all that I want to visualize. It just seemed really amazing. And that was the only one that I hadn't seen before and was totally blown away by. So I'm a little bit disappointed that you haven't shared this before, Johnny.
This thing existed. This is actually one that I found out relatively recently. It was actually somebody in chat on my weekly live stream where they had mentioned it, because it's kind of like, again, we talk a lot about dots and ECS stuff on my channel. And, the main kind of like selling point, I guess, for this asset is it works in a fully, bursted and ECS context. So, not a lot of traditional Unity things work, inside of the burst compiler and all that, which is, very high performance, high efficiency and all that. But ALINE works perfectly from burst and inside of jobs. So when you're doing some, complex multi-threading setups and you want to, just test some visualizations to ensure that you're doing the correct thing that you think you are, you can do that all within there. So yeah, it's been awesome for that reason.
Yeah, I just want little distance lines and stuff. Nice, simple stuff.
Exactly. And you can do that. You can do all that too. Yeah, you don't need to get all crazy with all burst and multi-threading and everything like that. Like it is just great, simple to use lines and grids and all that you can use from regular Unity mono behaviors.
I looked it up on the asset store as well. I was over here on my other monitor, and I saw the name of the person that made it, Aaron Granberg, and I was like, where have I heard that name? I know that name. And I looked at it. It's the same guy that made the A-Star Pathfinding Project Pro, which is like the best pathfinding asset that money can buy. So that instantly made me trust it more.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the visual stuff in the ALINE pathfinding project or the A-Star pathfinding project are built off of the same stuff that uses for ALINE.
Yes. Got it. Yes. That's really cool.
You probably built those tools, realized that it was actually useful for other people, and was like, hey, why don't I make this into an asset? Like, they're just a part of a tool that I have.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the power of the asset store, right? Is there's so many amazing assets that I think spawned from that like deep need a developer has that then realizes that they're not alone. They're not the only one on the island that needs that tool, which I think is super cool. Well, the last thing we want to go over is from Sasquatch B Studios. Like, what do you got for us? What are the three? Because I mean, we've already got 6 amazing ones, so I'm expecting some big ones out of you.
Yeah. So I'll jump right into it. So the 3 assets that I picked, 2 of them instantly will just make Unity more efficient and nicer to work with and easier to use. One of them is really going to save you a lot of time. The third one I selected has a more specific use case, but I couldn't help but pick it because for whatever reason, I just love the asset so much. So the first one I picked, which is probably the most universally known asset, which is Odin Inspector and Serializer. Probably, at least in my opinion, the best asset that money could possibly buy for Unity. I really wish that it was included by default in Unity. It's because you're able to, editor scripting is so much work. They get so long so fast, and I love having custom editor scripts for my inspector to just to be able to make it look nicer, whether I want to throw buttons in there. There's all sorts, just like stylize it and make it nicer to work with, hide certain things based on different variables and whatnot. All of that stuff can be done without assets, but it's way more work than I would ever want. And Odin takes that and you can just write some attributes and you're done. It's really, really easy. The other one, V Hierarchy 2, which is made by the same people as vTabs 2, which Jason selected. So that one, you just install it. Unity is instantly nicer to work with. You can customize your inspector and it just makes it really, really nice. There's not much of a learning curve with that one. And the third one is Text Animator for Unity, which is the more specific use case. But If you need any kind of dialogue in your game, this is the asset that you're going to want. It's really going to bring your text to life. It lets you animate your text very, very easily using rich text tags, which if you don't know what those are, you'll see in the video I explained that a little bit. So it really easily allows you to animate your text, type it all out one character at a time. And there's even some stuff I didn't even manage to get to in my video, like you can create events based on rich text tags as well. I had that in there, but I had to crop it out because my video was getting too long. But yeah, there's all sorts of great stuff you can do. So I hope you guys enjoy.
Perfect. Well, with that said, let's jump right into the demo so y'all can see these amazing assets, and we'll be back shortly.
Unity is really customizable. You can change just about anything from properties to the entire inspector for a script, among other things. But there is a lot of painful custom editor code that you need to write in order to set up even the most basic customization. Odin basically strips away all of that work and lets you do whatever you want just using attributes. So what would have taken an entire separate script with many, many lines of code can be done with just one simple line of code. It's also packed with other utilities and enhancements. So first we install it from the package manager. Now, if you're not familiar with custom editor scripting, I'll show you a quick example. Let's say we want to create a button to just randomly throw a color onto a square. And we'll do that by calling this method here. If you wanted to do this without Odin, you'd set up a separate class, usually in a separate script in an editor folder. We'll make it inherit from editor after you add the Unity editor namespace. And we give it the custom editor attribute. Get a reference to our script and assign that as the target in onEnable. And then we draw the actual inspector in the onInspectorGUI method. So we'll draw the default and then add a button like this and call the color sprite method. And these custom editor scripts can get very long, very fast, but you can see it is working. But with Odin, we just add the namespace at the top and add the button attribute above this method. And that's it. Now, of course, there's all sorts of optional stuff you can add in here to stylize the button. And everything that you want to do with Odin is just easy. Let me show you some of my favorites. It's a good idea to have a color palette you're working with for your game. So adding the color palette attribute takes it from just one color selection to having your entire palette right there for you. Click the gear icon to create your own palette. The show if attribute is my favorite. Being able to hide certain fields based on a bool value is a really nice way to have a clean, uncluttered inspector. Let's say we want to hide the name of these floats here, and instead create a nice little title for them that's centered instead. And maybe we make those red to make them stand out a little bit. And we don't want this to be negative, so let's make sure it doesn't go below 1 and this doesn't go below 2. And if we do go below those, now we'll get this nice validation warning. And I've set up a weapon sprite, but what's really great is actually being able to see it in the inspector. We'll give it a title and hide the label again. Now I've got these ability stats here, and it would be really cool to split those into tabs and give those tabs some nice icons and colors to make them stand out. Now, this is called Odin Inspector and Serializer, and the other part of the name comes from the fact that Odin has its own serializer that runs on top of Unity's to allow you to serialize things that you natively can't. For example, with a normal monobehavior class, if I try to serialize a dictionary, or this iWeapon interface here, they don't show up in the inspector. But if we change this from a monobehavior to a serialized monobehavior, now we have a serialized dictionary and interface. The Odin serializer is very powerful, but it does make serialization take longer since it has to run after Unity's. So if you don't care about the extra serialization options, you can go to editor only mode here and enable editor only mode. I use Odin purely as a time saver and an organizational tool. I'm lazy. When I'm building a really complex system that has a lot of options in the inspector, I really just want to slap up some quick attributes and then just be done with it. I don't want to have to write a whole bunch of custom editor code. I actually really wish that Odin was just built right into Unity as a default, because it would save a lot of Unity devs a lot of time. vHierarchy 2 is a really simple plug and play tool that instantly just makes your hierarchy more customizable and easier to work with. And it comes with a lot of little time savers and shortcuts built in as well. So again, we install from the package manager, and you can see this is pretty lightweight. And once it's installed, it'll automatically just be enabled by default. All of these icons in your hierarchy can start to look really samey with just white for enabled, grayed out for disabled, and blue for prefabs. So to make things stand out a little bit, we'll hold the Alt key and click on an object. And now we have two sets of options here. We can assign a color or we can assign an icon. You can adjust the colors or add more icons in the vHierarchy palette asset file. So you'll notice the color is a gradient right now. And if you don't like that, you can just make it full alpha. And you can reorder the rows as well. And just click the plus button to assign a new icon. And to get rid of the color or the icon, just click the X here. I'm going to turn on the component minimap, and you'll notice there are these icons in the hierarchy now. And if you alt click those, you can adjust values for just that one component in a little pop-up window over here, which is particularly useful when you have a game object with a lot of components on it. Now it does close whenever you click outside of it, unless you hit the pin button first, in case you want to have multiple components open at once. Next, I'll activate hierarchy lines. And these are pretty self-explanatory. I really wish these were built into Unity by default because it does make it so much easier to tell what object is parented to what object. There's also a minimal mode, which gets rid of all the icons except for the ones that you explicitly set up yourself. There's this zebra striping option, which isn't really my cup of tea, but I can see why some people would like it. Activation toggles are interesting. You'll notice as you highlight over game objects, there's a checkbox on the left here that lets you enable and disable the object, which is a nice little time saver that I like to use. And this collapse all button just adds this tiny little button here and lets you collapse everything in your hierarchy all at once. And finally, it comes with some nice keyboard shortcuts, each of which can be enabled or disabled here. You don't even have to select the game object, just highlight over it, A to activate or deactivate, F to focus on that game object, X to delete, E to expand or collapse. And I like this one. So I'm highlighting over my player and I'll press Shift E, which collapses everything but what I'm highlighting currently, and Control Shift E to collapse everything. And that's vHierarchy 2. It's easy, it's simple, there's literally no learning curve. Just install it and instantly make your hierarchy nicer to work with more customization options. I really like simple plug and play assets like this where I don't have to learn anything, it just instantly makes my time in Unity better. This is, in my opinion, one of the best assets available for dialogue in Unity. This tool will animate your text and it will handle all of the complex typewriter stuff. I specifically remember playing Cult of the Lamb and wondering how they got their dialogue looking so nice, and I discovered it was actually using this asset. So again, we'll install it from the package manager. Now I've gone ahead and set up this simple dialog box on my player with some text displayed with TextMesh Pro. I've just set it up so that if I press F on my keyboard, then we activate the dialog box, and if I press E on my keyboard, it moves to the next line of dialogue. But it's a little jarring because the dialogue is just there when each new line is displayed. So let's get a typewriter effect going to get those characters popping in one at a time. So we'll add a text animator component and a typewriter by character component. And check typewriter starts automatically. And already if I hit play and open up my dialog box, it types it out one character at a time. Although if you want to explicitly set the typewriter yourself in code, we'll add this namespace so that we can get a reference to our typewriter core. And then we'd replace this line here with the typewriter's showText method. Now currently we're not able to skip anything properly yet, so let's fix that. This is pretty simple as well because this asset has all sorts of handy events built right in. So we're going to add a bool to check if the current line is shown. And in our start method, we'll subscribe to an event by calling the addListener function and call this little function here, which will just change our bool to true. This event fires automatically as soon as all of the text in a dialog line is displayed. And now we can put this to false every time we continue our text. And now we can check in our update, is all of the text showing? Because if it's not, we'll skip the function, and if it is, then we'll continue the text sequence. And now, with this really simple script, we have a fully functional dialogue system where we can skip through text until we get to the end of the conversation. And I would love to close this dialog box once we're done our conversation.
So we can subscribe to the onTextDisappeared event and fire our toggle dialog box function when our text has disappeared. And to actually make our text disappear, we'll say down here, else will start disappearing. And finally, for the sake of keeping this clean, we really should be removing these listeners in the onDisable method as well. And you can see once we get to the end of this conversation, I press E one more time and the text disappears. And when that's done, the whole box closes as well. Now, two things I want to point out is that the text dynamically changes the timing based on the punctuation. A period in your sentence will create a pause in the typing. That's automatic, and you can change those settings down here in the typewriter. But also, you may have noticed that our text animates when it's typed in, and it animated when it disappeared. Those are the effects at work, which is my favorite part of this asset. There's a whole list of built-in effects that you can use to animate your text with this asset, and you can add them using rich text tags. If you don't know what those are, here's a really quick example. I'll add this before and this after to make the word hey italicized. And I'll add this before and this after the word there to make it red. So that functionality is built into TextMesh Pro and has nothing to do with this asset, but this asset expands your rich text tag options. So now let's actually spice up the word hey even more, and I'll do that by adding the wave effect. And that's way too strong, but that's fine because we can control any of these properties within the text tag. So I'll just lower the amplitude a lot by changing it to maybe 0.05. So there are three kinds of effects. Those ones there that we manually put in are called behaviors, and they loop over and over as long as they're on the screen. But we also have appearing and disappearing effects as well. You'll notice that our text grows into existence when it's first typed out and it fades when it disappears. Well, you can see under our appearances option, we're using the size effect, and under the disappearance, we're using fade. So we could change those really easy. Let's change our appearance to horizontal expand and our disappearance to random direction. And if you want to preview what those will look like in the editor, you can. So I'll add a behavior in my test text here as well and hit preview in editor mode. So you can see the behavior playing on a loop there. And if you want to see the appearance, change these both to 0 and drag this along to the end. And to see the disappear, you can drag the left side over. One of the coolest parts though is that they made it really easy for you to create your own effects as well. And give it a name. The tag ID is the rich text tag that you'll have to type in, and we'll scale it on the Y and rotate it on the Z. And I'll animate the colors as well. We'll go from black to purple to black. And once we're done creating that, we need to remember to add this to our behavior database. So I can just throw that effect in there like any of the other effects, and it works just like that. I love this asset because of how designer friendly it is. It's highly customizable. There's all kinds of stuff you can do with it. I didn't manage to cover everything, and yet it manages to keep a really low learning curve. There's never been anything I needed to do with this asset that took me more than just a couple of minutes to figure out how to do it. Honestly, a lot of this asset is so simple and friendly to use that I'm able to figure it out without even reading the docs. I use this asset anytime I need dialogue in a game. And even if I don't have dialogue in a game, if I want to just really spice up some text and give it some flavor, I'll use this asset as well. That's all I got. I hope you enjoyed. Bye.
You weren't kidding. Those are amazing assets. Every time I see an Odin demo, at least for me specifically, like I know a lot about Odin. We talk to that team all the time. They're very prevalent in Unity, but every time I see an Odin demo from somebody else, there's always a new thing I learn. It's just got so much depth and availability, which is so cool.
Yeah. Every time I make a video on Odin, I learn something new about it as well, because there's just so many different attributes that you can use. I've maybe only had it for like 6 months or something, so I've only just kind of scratched the surface with it, but oh man, does it ever make my life easier. I love that tool so much.
Yeah, I've been using Odin since, I don't even know, many years ago, since the 2010s or whenever it came out. And it is the only reason I didn't talk about it in my list was because I've talked about it so many times and told so many people that they should use it enough times that I feel like they already have heard it from me. I've told every executive at Unity that they should just bring it in and make it part of the editor. It totally changes the experience. And like you said, if you want to make editors, like you said, you like making editor scripts. I think you like making editors without the scripts, right? Like just make, because in there you get an editor, you don't have to make a script for it. You just put in some attribute, or make a little script and then list the things you want with attributes and you're done. It is amazing and super powerful. The other two, great too, but I'm curious what Johnny thinks of Odin. Do you use it a lot with dots?
I mean, I use it kind of now and then. It depends on, you know, the projects I'm working and a lot of the client stuff that I do. I unfortunately can't use it too much, but I really do love Odin. I mean, of course, it's a legendary asset. Great team of people behind it too. Had a chance to meet many of them, and they're all really good people. And yeah, Brandon, like you say, like, you know, editor scripting is extremely important because, you know, like, you know, especially as your project starts to grow and you bring, you know, more people onto the team, you know, dealing with all that stuff just kind of like in regular Unity, you know, it ends up getting really messy. And then if you have like a lot of good editor tooling where you have, you know, buttons and different labels, like better kind of like labeling and stuff like that, all right within the Unity editor, kind of like, you know, customizing it more to your needs, you know, that's extremely important, and it's going to, you know, be much better for the kind of like longer development cycles of your project. And yeah, exactly like you say, like editor scripting is not always the most fun stuff to write. A lot of it gets like very repetitive and very verbose. So yeah, just having like, you know, literally like single little attribute tags that you can put over things to, you know, just, you know, completely change your editor experience it's so nice.
Yeah, I really want to also reference, I loved the text animator. I was sold on that instantly. Like as soon as I saw like the typewriter dialogue coming in, the way you could layer dialogue so quickly, I can't tell you how many game jams with students I've hosted where they find like 2 or 3 tutorials on YouTube on how to do like text systems, right? And they're working through it, and that's like 20% of their dev time. When it's like you could just grab this, just it's been done, it's been solved. Like such a cool tool, and I loved, you know, the color shifting and like the bouncy stuff really added some fun to it. So it's a pretty cool asset for the text animation.
Yeah, I really love that asset.
Yeah, and I think it's great that it works really well with rich tags. I think rich tags are great for Text Mesh Pro, just kind of like built in by default, you know, but having all that, you know, extra stuff that you can do, just, you know, built right in through the editor. You don't have to like make any extra scripts or anything to do it. You know, just add those extra little tags in there. And yeah, one thing I actually didn't realize is that you could do like your own custom tags. So you can kind of like make your own custom behaviors and assign those to custom tags. And then boom, now any of your designers now have access to those features.
Yep. You can do it with events too. Like I had a whole section, like I said, I had to cut out where I created a little event that did a camera shake. And is like, and it times it exactly with when the word pops up onto the screen, right? So, and you custom make those as well and just insert them there as a rich text tag. It's so cool.
That's great.
Yeah, I've used it in a bunch of projects too. Pretty much anything that's got text in it, because it takes about 2 minutes to import it, another 2 minutes to put in the tags, and suddenly your text looks cool and alive, and you've done almost no work. So I mean, I never go in and make my own events or anything. I just go in there and I'm like, oh, let's make this wiggle, let's make this bounce, and I find all the right tags for the stuff, and it just looks cool instantly. And I'm like, oh, look at all the work I did. I added a tag here.
Oh, amazing. Well, I'm so glad y'all made the time to come through, show us all these amazing assets. It's, again, there's so much richness you can get by expending for your workflow, right? Building things to make your workflow faster and optimize your time, which I think is something that resonates with all of us, right? It's about getting work done in a more efficient manner so that we can focus on the stuff we love inside the editor and not resolve problems. So yeah, I think that's everything we wanted to talk to everybody about today. But is there any final words y'all want to share with the good people on the internet before we close this thing out?
I just wanted to quickly call out that vTabs and vHierarchy again. That guy's got like a load of different tools that are all really cool. Those are the two that I've used the most because there's just so much that gets absorbed into my brain. Like I'm trying to remember how to use everything, but those two are just really cool too. And I don't think we talked about them enough for just how useful they are and how instantly they add value. Like vTabs, I just go side by side. I got folders everywhere and saves me so much headache. And the hierarchy, I've played with it a bit after watching your video again, though. I'm just going to start making it another default too. And I'm probably going to go through the rest of that guy's stuff and just start spending more time and defaulting those into.
Yeah, I'm gonna pick up vTabs because that one looked really good. You had some great use cases in there. I spend a lot of time just shifting through my folders and looking for certain assets, and yeah, it's
Locking
gonna save me
tabs.
time.
If you ever lock a tab, you should try vTabs.
all the time.
Yeah.
That's everybody, I think, at this point.
Yep. Yep.
Cool. Well, on that note, y'all have a good one, and we'll catch you again.